Hello, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning. And so I begin this morning by sharing with you that here where I live in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, I have a colleague, a fellow Unity minister, who is serving as an interim minister in Austin, Texas. And the other day she referred to herself as their bridge minister. And that brought all sorts of visualization for me. I loved that description of a bridge, for a bridge symbolizes movement, a crossing over, maybe crossing over a river or something rocky terrain, a gorge, a valley. But it's a way that we move forward. There's motion implied with a bridge. And we are doing that together, you and I together, moving forward. We are not just holding the status quo, with forward movement on our spiritual paths. One of the talks that I gave in December, I talked about moving from the year 2020 into the year 2021 and how scary that bridge was. It was very steep, very high, a little bit rickety. And we can't see what is on the other side. There's a mystery, there's an unknown factor to this bridge that we are crossing together. All of us with Unity of the Key Spiritual Center and in our personal lives. And then in November, Nemo, Nimesh Patel, gave a beautiful talk about it being time to build bridges, bridges representing connection and mending relationships. Well, as you and I cross this bridge over these next few months, we can choose to cross this bridge with excitement rather than anxiety. We can choose to cross this bridge with great expectancy, anticipation, delicious anticipation rather than trepidation. And we know we're crossing this bridge together. Although in Unity, we each have our own unique dance. A few steps forward, one back, we take a little circle, we take a detour. So we're not always crossing the bridge, holding hands, singing Kumbaya in perfect step. Because that's not life. That's not who we are. And yet, we know that even when we seem to be taking steps backward or taking detours, I am confident that we're actually making a motion in an upward spiral, always evolving higher in our own spiritual growth, in our own spiritual wholeness. And we are crossing this bridge. Well, this morning, I'd like to talk about another bridge. For tomorrow, we honor and celebrate the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And there are many bridges that he crossed, but there's one in particular that I'm going to share the history of. It was a bridge that crossed the Alabama River. The Alabama River. And in 1940, it was named after a former Confederate Brigadier General, also a U.S. Senator. He was also a U.S. Senator, and he was also the leader of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. The Edmund Pettus Bridge. That was a different time. It's hard to speak these words. It was hard for me to research this and to try to bring into my understanding what happened in those years. It was in 1965 that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a group of nonviolent activists on marches across our United States to demonstrate the desire for African American citizens to exercise their constitutional right to vote. Their constitutional right to vote, which had been granted 95 years earlier. And yet, in the southern states, due to prejudice, due to segregationist repression, blacks were denied their right to vote. And so Dr. Martin Luther King had organized a march to cross this bridge in Selma, Alabama. There was a court order that decreed they were not to cross that bridge. And so Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., along with about 2,500 activists, nonviolent, walked to the center of the bridge, held a short prayer session, turned around, and came back so as to not violate the court order. They were greeted by the police on horseback with billy clubs and tear gas. There were reporters, there were TV stations, and what happened was televised. And our nation watched. We watched in horror, shock, and bewilderment. There was a public outcry, an outcry of sympathy and support for what these activists were trying to do. And this prompted a turnaround in public policy, and the demonstrators, the marchers, were given the go-ahead to continue the marches, which they did. They later, about 3 weeks later, crossed that same bridge, and they marched elsewhere in the United States. And the Voting Rights Act, which outlawed discriminatory voting practices, was put into action that same year. 50 years later, President Obama and former President George W. Bush, along with many other dignitaries and about 40,000 people, crossed that same bridge to commemorate, to symbolize how far we have come and how far we have yet to go. But today, what has happened over the last couple of weeks, we stand in horror, in shock, and bewilderment over what has happened in our capital. And this is regardless, it is not dependent upon our religious or our political affiliation. For we are Americans first, and we stand in bewilderment, wondering, how can this have happened? How did we get here? How could we have gotten to this place? We've been knocked off center. We feel vulnerable. And many folks have shared this feeling over the past couple of weeks. They don't feel grounded. They really feel knocked off center with what has occurred. Well, this morning I share with you some inspiration from a wonderful book. It's called Welcoming the Unwelcome, Wholehearted Living in a Brokenhearted World. It is from Pema Chodron. And Pema is an American-born Buddhist nun, a beloved spiritual teacher, and the author of over 20 books. And what she has tried to accomplish in this book is to present an open-hearted call for human connection, compassion, and learning to love the world just as it is during these most challenging times, during these turbulent times. This is something that I am not all that good at. I'm waiting for the world to be perfect. There's things that happen that I don't love. And so do I find myself withholding the love in my heart because the world is not behaving itself? And what Pema Chodron is telling us in this book is no. We must love the world just as it is, because it is through our love that the world will change, that we change, and through us, our world changes. And she tells us to begin with a broken heart. Wow, that is so opposite of how we function in this world. We generally will take any effort necessary to protect our broken heart. We don't want to start with a broken heart. We don't want to be vulnerable. That's opposite how we approach life. We want to shield ourselves from pain. We want to shield ourselves from suffering. However, protecting ourselves from pain, our pain or the pain of others, has never worked. For when we do that, we shrink. We actually shrink our world, for we're cutting ourselves off. We're isolating ourselves. We're cutting ourselves off. And when we see that what we want to do is protect ourselves from this pain, what we ultimately do is cut ourselves off from the full experience of life. And when our main goals are to gain comfort and to avoid discomfort, then we not only feel disconnected, but we feel threatened by the pain of others. And we enclose ourselves in a mesh of fear. And that is the natural tendency. That is actually fundamentally normal. You reach out, the stove is hot, you burn yourself, you feel the heat, you pull back. We do the same thing with our emotions. That is fundamentally very normal. And yet, when people and when countries approach life in this way, when we engage in this way of being, the result is a very messy situation, both locally and globally, and it results in great pain, great conflict, and great distrust. But Pema Chodron describes in this book that there is another way. There is another way for all of us. Instead of shying away, resisting those feelings of discomfort, those feelings of pain, we take a brave and direct look at ourselves and at our world. Rather than being intimidated or fearful, we can embrace all aspects of our incredibly rich lives. And the first step we take is to allow ourselves our own raw feelings, welcoming the unwelcome. Allow ourselves our own raw feelings without, and this is the key, without getting sucked into the story, without getting stuck into judgments or thoughts about those feelings. So let's take an example. I'm feeling lonely. And in the pandemic, there's a lot of people feeling lonely and isolated. I can choose to get stuck in judgments. I can start blaming myself, blaming COVID, blaming the government, blaming the airlines, blaming whoever. Or I can wishful think. I can think about how wonderful it will be when the day comes that I won't feel lonely because I can get out and I can interact with people. We can go there. Or there's another way. We experience those raw feelings. We name them. We identify what those raw feelings are. And then we move into our heart center, just as Carolyn just took us into our heart. We breathe into our heart center. We feel the warmth of the essence of love and compassion within us. And then we pull those raw feelings, that raw feeling of loneliness, right into our heart. And we let that feeling of loneliness be bathed in light and love. Let our raw feeling of loneliness be soothed by the essence of love that we all are, right here in our own vulnerable heart. And then the next step, the third step, is I realize that my own loneliness is no different from the loneliness that everyone else on this planet experiences. And I invite their feelings of loneliness into my heart to be bathed in that same God love and light and compassion. It is that simple. It is that simple. Rather than avoiding discomfort, we choose to recognize and honor that discomfort, that pain in ourselves and in others. And we invite our own feelings of pain and discomfort into our heart, as well as those feelings of others in our world. And what we have done, rather than disconnect from others, rather than feeling isolated and disconnected, we have used our feeling of discomfort to connect all of humanity, to be part of universal healing. For we're healing ourselves and we're healing one another. I put this into practice several times this week as I was working on looking for references in my talk and meditating and taking the advice from Pema Chodron. And one morning I woke up missing one of my children. Now, between Danny and I, we have 5 children. We also have grandchildren. We have a grandchild on the way. But on this particular morning, I woke up missing the youngest of our clan, my youngest daughter, with such intensity that my body hurt. And every time I would think of her, tears would come to my eyes. And we connected that day. She was fine. There was nothing going on with her. But I was feeling this intense missing. I'll call it a missingness of this individual, this wonderful love of my life. And I allowed myself to take that raw feeling of missingness into my heart. I let it be bathed in God love and light. I let it be soothed. And then I recognized that my feeling of missing my daughter was no different than that same feeling in people all over the world. And not getting caught up in the story or judgments or thoughts about why they might be missing their children, not even going there, pulling in their missingness into my heart and allowing those feelings to be soothed and to be eased within me. We all have moments of feeling loneliness or grief or sadness or even anger, fear, judgments, or prejudice. And if we really connect with what that feeling is at that moment without going into the story or thoughts or judgment, we find ourselves standing in the shoes of humanity, all of humanity, serving all of humanity. For it's from this place, longing to alleviate suffering in the world, that this comes naturally. We can go against the grain. We can go against that natural tendency to pull back. From the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we are told in each one that Jesus, our way shower, our elder brother, said, "Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself." And this is truly loving your neighbor, our neighbors all across the globe, taking in their hurts along with our own and healing them. In Buddhism, it's called bodhicitta, and it means enlightenment mind, and it is a striving towards awakening the empathy and compassion within us to the benefit of all sentient beings. That is truly loving our neighbors as ourselves. And so right now, I ask you, what is stirred up in you? Where do you have a discomfort? It may be about these events, these national events, or it may be something else. Take a moment right now and just scan your mind for something that is hurting, some discomfort that you are feeling. And now to yourself, name that feeling. What is it? And you put a name to it without any story or thoughts or judgments about having it or thinking I shouldn't have that thought, I shouldn't feel that way. Don't go there. Just name the feeling. Now, pull it into your heart center. Pull it into that space that you identify with the essence of love and compassion and God light within you. Name that feeling and pull it in and allow it to bask in God's love and God's light. Even have a candle lit back here to represent that within you. That beautiful God love and God light. And now consider that this feeling is no different from that feeling that everyone else on this planet experiences. And invite that pain or that discomfort, that feeling of others into your heart, into your own vulnerable heart. Just pull everyone's hurt in that has the same name. Feel your pain and discomfort soften. Feel your compassion expand. And feel your inner peace grow. Okay, I invite you back with me now. We begin with a broken heart, a heart that longs to help others, and we choose to be brave, to welcome the unwelcome. This practice, which is really a way of life, will bless you and countless others in countless ways. For our world needs us, you and me, right now. And so it is. Amen.